Hey everybody, it's Mike Venus, La Soul, and I'm back. And it's funny, bro. One thing I found out about watching tutorials on YouTube is that, especially dealing with music theory, it can be really like complicated, or people make this simple language of music extremely complicated when it's really not that complicated. It's really not. And I feel like it's a blessing, yet it could be perceived as a curse as being self-taught. Like I'm self-taught. So um I had my reasons. First and foremost, I didn't want to play like anybody else. So I felt like that was very important to me as a musician, as an artist. Um I didn't want to be like an imitation of another person. Now that does not mean I can't be influenced by other people or other styles of music or genres, but that means I have no interest in really learning a particular genre and just mastering that. Because I might not like everything about that genre, or certain things about that genre does not it won't translate well in today's term, or it's too many rules, or it's just boring. It's just boring. Or energy wise, I just don't want to go to that place. So I'll give you some examples, right? So when I started out um, playing guitar, right, everybody learns like something basic. Like you might learn rock and roll, blues, something simple. And I was like, yo, this is it. This is all they do. What about all this other stuff? Like what about like the rest of these notes, or is the pentatonic scale the only scale that you play? It seemed pretty limited. Not saying that, not shitting on those guys, because like to do what they do to make it work with just what they're doing with is very impressive. But I wanted to learn more. You know what I'm saying? So what I would do is a suggestion, and I feel like this is what helps me to kind of like still have my touch when it comes to things like, and it also helped me to develop my taste for what I like to hear and where I like to make, where I want to go when I'm making music, right, or expressing myself. So what I did, I had got a book, right. My mom had bought me a guitar, and a one of those like books that come with it to learn the basic stuff, like how to play notes on the fretboard, you know, simple songs. And I was just like, nah, this shit kind of boring. But then I bought a book on music theory. Now, like I said, I think where people kind of get this shit complicated, when teaching music theory, they think it's one word. I know it's two words, but the way most people perceive it, they perceive it as one word, right? Like, oh, okay, it's music theory, so I need to know all this technical jogging, and that's going to make me a better player. No, like, think of it as like you're learning a particular language, a simple alphabet, starting out with the chromatic scale in the Western term. I ain't getting into microtonal and all that other stuff. Just 12 notes, bro. 12 notes, right? And then from that 12 notes, you can make scales from 5. I done seen some with 8, 9 notes in it, right? But you pick You can pick most of the scales that people learn is derived from the chromatic scale. That's the alphabet. Then when you get a scale, right, you getting a particular set of letters or notes, right, that kind of hone you into a particular key. And from that, you can learn how to build words, in this case, chords, right? And you learn like what notes to play on top of these scales, or I mean what scales to play on top of these chords. But I feel like people they make this shit super complicated, bro. So complicated. So like what I've been doing like a history test, or history research on westernized music, because like this is what music theory is based off of, like European westernized music, going back to like the medieval times, Renaissance, the Baroque era, the classical era, and up to the modern day. And when I found out from just studying, it's like they didn't have all this shit. They didn't have, like, if you go back to like the medieval times, they weren't even using chords, bro. There was no theory or technical way of describing chords. They were doing like a drone, and maybe or like just a solo vocalist, and it was really either influenced by the Catholic Church or by kings or queens that hired these composers and musicians and singers to perform in their courts for their personal pleasure or for their guests. That's really where all this stuff started to really like develop. You know what I'm saying? And one thing that I liked about doing this research is that these composers that you learn in these schools and people reverence and worship, these guys were doing what I'm doing. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, like you're experimenting, you listening, you figuring out, okay, if I play this note and I play this note up against this note, dealing with intervals before they made a system. They're like, I don't like the way that sound, or that's rubbing too much up against that note. Maybe if I, make the jump between two notes a little bit wider. Oh, that sounds good. That sounds good. Okay, let me make a note on that. You know, and this is how the theory start to build. But a lot of that now in today's terms have been like so technical and formatic um instruction, to the point that it's not even like, if you were to just solely think that that will make your music great, your music's gonna sound terrible, because you're bounding yourself based off of what people think that these people were doing, besides exploring. So first and foremost, I always say learn the language of music. Learn first, what are the notes? You know what I'm saying? In the chromatic scale. This is going like a half step or semitone up to the octave. So if you start at C, you're going from C to an octave up C, and you're playing every note in between, right? That's the chromatic scale, right? That's the alphabet to music, westernized music. Then from there, play C, and then move up the chromatic scale, and you start to listen. What notes sound, if that was played up against this C, how would that sound? This is where you start to get into the counterpoint, when that was developed, right? Because before they was just doing a melody. Then you had something like a drone, one continuous pitch played, and then they will sing on top of that. But those notes that was sung on top of that continuous tone was experimented and figured out by what notes sound good on top of that particular tone. this was starting in the development of counterpoint, right? Or even harmony, because that's harmony, two-part harmony. Then from there, you get into like the Renaissance period, where you start to get more into like modes, right? This is where you get modes. Modes are scales within scales, right? So like if you got the major scale, you got 7 modes. If you got the minor scale, you got 7 modes. Harmonic minor, melodic minor, etc. And each scale degree, if you start from that and you work up to its octave using only those notes, that's a mode. It's a scale within a scale. And what they will do is that you will have that underlying tone going, and you will play those pitches that's part of that particular mode up against that tone to capture those types of feels. And this is not even really getting into like 3 to 4 plus voicings, which today they call chords, but really harmony, which chords are harmony, but harmony is really 2 notes played simultaneously at the same time. And counterpoint was the beginning of harmony after, the drone thing. And then it developed, and then they started to add more voices. You get 3, 4, 5. You know what I'm saying? As you start moving more into the classical era, where everybody know about like Mozart, Beethoven, and then you move towards today, and then even jazz. Like jazz, to me, is similar to classical music in the facet of how it developed from the medieval to the Renaissance to the Baroque, classical, romantic era. It's like that in jazz, but it's kind of, I won't say it's complicated, but it's kind of simplified. You understand? In a way that it makes sense. And it kind of helps that I kind of went into jazz before I went back and learned all this stuff on my own, at my own pace, as I was understanding like, okay, how did they even come up with this theory or this understanding of like how these intervals or tones work together to create this harmonic complexity or color that provokes this emotion from an individual. Without being bogged down with all these rules and, this is how they did it. You know what I'm saying? Because even though I don't play their music, I can still be inspired by them, just like those composers were inspired. And this is how music evolved from just one person singing, a single person singing, to a person singing on top of a continuous tone, to multiple singers singing different lines that interwove to create the same effect, to now having multiple instruments and singers with that, to where we are today. You understand? So like the theory is going into like what these guys were doing. They were experimenting. They was figuring out, okay, if I play this note on top of this note, how does it sound? How does it make me feel? Or if I'm doing this, why does it feel like this? That's the theory part. After they had already learned the music part. You gotta learn the music part. That's probably the easiest thing anybody can learn. It didn't take me long to learn that on my own. It's very simple. It's one of the smallest alphabets that you could think of. And then from there, you start to theorize. You start to experiment. That's what a theory is. You throw out a hypothesis, you experiment on it, and then you come to your conclusion if you like it or you don't, or this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. Why doesn't this make sense? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, in jazz, blues, rock music, they use the tritone. Well, why is it the sharp fourth in the major scale like Lydian, right? Or Lydian augmented, Lydian dominant. Why wasn't it used back then? Because the church deemed that as a tritone, which they deemed as the devil note. So it wasn't really present in their music because either the music was influenced from the church that could pay the composer and the musicians and the singers, or they were getting paid by kings and queens to perform and play and write for them. Then you have blues and jazz and rock come from that school where that is the sound. That is the flavor that they like to use, you know? And that opened a whole nother thing. And these are like two major fields that they study in musical school, and most of these people that you know major in this, they can't really play music. A lot of them can't. Some of them they were naturally talented before they went to school and got bogged down. Some of them they listen to what they like and they discard the rest because it doesn't really apply to them or what they want to do. Then you have others that it's to the letter, and they believe that this makes them musical without really just doing what it's supposed to do. Like you learn about music. Okay, what's the what's the notes called? How why is this chord called this chord? Okay, how you make chords? You know what I'm saying? Can I make my own scale? Can I if I like this scale, right? And I like this type of chord that derives from that scale, can I play it with this chord? That might come from another scale. And experiment. That's how I learn. You know? And then from that I can kind of like write down what I've discovered through my experimentation of chords, scales played on that chord progressions, and create an approach that is unique to me, which is what these composers did back in the day, right? And musicians and people that they idolize in these schools, and yet if they were alive today, they will tell you the same thing. You learn music, but then you experiment and you figure shit out and you like what you like. And if you can make it make sense and it sounds good, it's good. Shit ain't really that complicated. Like I do a lot of shit that I know like it's not locked down to a particular genre, but I'm doing the same thing. Like, okay, I like this type of mode or scale. I like these type of chords. What if I blend it with this type of rhythm? Or what if I blend it with these type of sounds that come from this style of music or this concept that was used in this style of music and incorporating what I'm doing, and let's see how that sounds. This is what makes music fun. That's why you don't really have a lot of like composers today. I understand like people who go to school for it and they become concert musicians and stuff, but it's like, do you write? Like, did you just, some people that's what they're good at. They're good at playing. Then there's other people who like can play and write. Some people who can just write. But in all those facets, you still have to be curious. You still have to explore and try things or take concepts from things that might not be popular within that genre or field you're doing and try to fit it into what you do and see if it works. If it doesn't, then it's cool. If it does, that's cool too. But that's part of the fun of learning music theory. That's when I say learn music theory. First, learn music. It's not that hard. It's really not that complicated. It's not that hard. It requires you to just focus and listen and figure out what you like. Then from there, explore. That's the theory part. Yeah, you learn how to build stuff and things of that nature, but don't be so bogged down by these set rules to the point that your musical expression comes across stale and is lacking your touch, your feel, your emotional expression that you're trying to convey in your music. So just think about that. That's what I think about when I study music theory. Like right now I'm studying counterpoint. mainly because of the instrumentation I use, and I want to challenge myself. Am I going to make music similar to this era of music? Hell no, no. It won't sell. It's not going to sell. Ain't nobody really going to be bumping that. But I like jazz. Jazz use stuff that this doesn't really use, but I can blend it too if I like what I like from jazz and I like what I like from classical music in this concept of counterpoint, and I like drums and shit, you know, from different styles or cultures, and I apply together. That's me performing music theory. That's what you experiencing when you hear the music that I'm releasing. You know, in this way, it keeps you always fresh, always innovating, always exploring. Use your imagination, bro. Don't just think this is it. So when you watching YouTube or social media, you know, learn what you need to learn. Learn the basics, you know what I'm saying? But then play with the play off of the basics. Don't always stick to it. And try new things. And from there you might find and discover your sound, your taste, you know what I'm saying, and what you like to do. And that's how you create your style and your identity, your sound. That can't be replicated by another person. Even if they learn the same thing you learn. That's another thing. Like, I might tell you about counterpoint, but the way you might approach it might be totally different from me. And it doesn't mean we always gonna have the same result. It's like that on my channel. I ain't really giving you my process or my secrets to how I do things, because I feel like in a lot of interviews and stuff, they try to get that out of people, thinking that they can logically understand how music works, when music is just, it's an emotional expression, bro. Emotions and logic don't really mix. You know what I'm saying? So you could choose how you want to approach this. You can approach it from an analytical, logical mindset, and just, wonder why your music feels dead, even though it might sound good technically. Or you can learn the technical stuff, but you use that to kind of help you to get to the point where you're able to not be in your head as much, and you can just feel, because music deals with feeling. And it's something that, if I can't speak, you don't speak English, you don't talk how I talk, you can still understand what I'm trying to express through my music. That's why it's the universal language. That's why I had that on my page.